Hello to those people that are just joining us. I'm sorry we were a minute late, but welcome. We're hopefully going to start very shortly, so we'll just give it a minute, and hopefully Helen is letting people in. So, yeah. I think we've probably let most people in now, so we're not going to keep waiting. We're going to jump straight into it. So welcome everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to share some inspiring work with you, which we're going to be hopefully doing here in Derbyshire. If you could all keep your audio muted. I don't think you have a choice, but just in case you do, if you could just keep it muted, that would be great, just for the benefit of everybody. It's also worth noting that this webinar is being recorded. So if you do not want to be recorded, if you just want to turn your cameras off, that would be great too. So my name is Danielle, and I'm part of the Communities and Connections team at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust. And we are joined today by my colleague, Ruth Pilbeam. Ruth is our Rewilding Projects Officer in the Strategy and Innovation team, and she's passionate about creating wildlife-rich landscapes where both nature and people can thrive. And this evening, Ruth will be talking about our ambitious project to reintroduce 3 key species: the white stork, the pine marten, and the Eurasian elk, to Derbyshire's landscapes. She'll explain how our first phase supports these reintroductions, and she'll also touch on why this is such a crucial time for nature's recovery and how our approach will create lasting positive impacts for generations to come. Ruth will be taking you through all of this in detail, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session. So please feel free to post in the chat. If we don't get a chance to address them all at the end of the webinar, we will definitely email and send that out to you, so you will have those answers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ruth now. So hi, Ruth.
Hello, hi everybody. Helen's managing my slides for me, so thanks so much, Helen. Do you mind going forward one? I'll introduce myself while we work that one out. So my name is Ruth Pilbeam, as Danielle introduced. I'm a programme manager at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. So I'm hoping to explore species reintroduction with you. So hopefully everyone's got a cup of tea or a G&T or whatever, and I'd really encourage you to post questions in the chat, or we've got a Q&A throughout. And then at the end, we'll have a question and answer session where Danielle can read out some of the questions, and we'll be able to answer them this evening. So yes, I'd like to start our presentation on species reintroductions with a short video. Helen, if you could press play. If you go one more, it should automatically play. We've not had the easiest time with technology this evening, so bear with us. Helen, if you just press for the next slide, that should play. Oh, no, it didn't. Well, I will explain what our strategy is, or I've sent a link in the chat, and maybe we can jump back to the YouTube video in a moment. Essentially, we have our Wilder 2030 strategy. So this is really mapping out what we want to do over the next 5 years. And as our members, it's really important to us that you're understanding what we're talking about, that we're transparent with you from the outset, and you understand what this really looks like in the landscape, so that you can then support us to get there. If we go forward to the next slide, even though it's not the video, just the next slide. There we go. Amazing. So we have some key areas in our strategy. We want to rewild 100,000 acres of land and water in Derbyshire. We want to reintroduce pine marten, black grouse and white stork, and that's why we're here this evening. And we want to support 250 communities to lead nature recovery in their new neighbourhoods, all while growing a greener, fairer economy with people, wildlife and climate at its heart. So some really ambitious goals for us to work on over the next 5 years, and we've been diving into the detail as to what that actually looks like, at least in the next 3. We've all been busy business planning, and at least over the next year we have the detail for that. So what I'm going to be talking about is species reintroduction. So these are often things that can span months, years, if not decades, depending on the animal we're talking about. And so please bear with us as we go. But a key aim is to reintroduce 7 species by 2030. And we've particularly named the pine marten, black grouse and white stork in our strategy, but we'll also be talking about the Eurasian elk this evening, as that's such an exciting opportunity for us, and perhaps going to take a little bit longer than some of those species we've got here. If we go through to the next slide, please. Yeah, so why we're doing this, species are the foundation of ecological recovery. We want to recognise that there's an urgent need to reintroduce these species. We want to support the landscape scale change that is needed if we're going to create space for reintroduction. So this isn't just about bunging an animal back in the landscape. It's about absolutely making sure that we have habitat there for them, that they will be safe from persecution, that we can have sustainable populations. So it's not just thinking about putting one animal back, it's about recreating an environment where we can have the growth of a population in a safe way that works with the human needs for the area, and that will make sure that essentially longer term we can all live in better, more complex ecosystems in wilder landscapes, and both species and humans, animals and humans, benefiting from that. If we go forward, Helen. So this is species at the foundation of ecological recovery. We are missing many species from our ecosystems in Britain. So what reintroduction will do, will rebuild the ecosystem. Essentially, we're looking at enabling resilience in ecosystems. So this isn't just about enabling a struggling population at the point of decline to recover, although that's absolutely what we're doing. It's also about reintroducing species that can shape the environment, whether that's the physical environment or the social environment, to a point that has benefit for the other species within that ecosystem. This will over time create resilience. So when we're faced by climate change and different threats that we're going to have to adapt to over the years, we have higher levels of biodiversity, more carbon fixed in our ecosystems, and more healthy populations of the different animals and plants that are able to react and adapt to these threats. This is really about using the power of natural processes. So we allow the species to deliver natural processes which will then enable the ecosystem to sort of restore into autonomous function as such. So it doesn't have to be heavy input from people, it can be an autonomously functioning natural ecosystem. If we move on, Helen. So here we've got a little bit of an example of species reintroduction success. And this is our Willington Wetlands Nature Reserve down in the Trent Valley. What we've got here at the top is November 2022, which is just around the time that we reintroduced beavers at Willington for the first time. And you can see that the environment there, you know, it was a nature reserve there. We were pretty happy with it. But if you look at the difference with February 2023 there on the right, you can really see the beaver channels. You can see a much more complex, diverse ecosystem. You can see water moving throughout the site and all the many different additional habitats that are created there to enable more and more different species to populate. So it's much more diverse wetland there. And actually, you can start to see the benefits of creating a wilder environment below when we look at September 22 compared with September 2025. Now, you can see in September 2022, under the sort of the hot drought conditions that we'd had in the area at the time, actually, I'm not sure if that year was particularly drought, but extreme heat that we're having every year. We were all experiencing it. And the surrounding farm fields turned to sort of brown, whereas actually beaver wetlands are amazing at holding water, so they can slow the flow and they can release slowly during periods of drought, so that the surrounding area does not crisp up, but it maintains water in the soil, and therefore you're going to see so much less in terms of damage, in terms of decline of species, dying from stress and thirst and drought and so on. It's also worth saying that this is it's a representation in front of you of nature-based solutions. So this is looking at the benefits to society and fixing broken and leaky systems. So it's about seeing where before we damaged these natural ecosystems, they were actually sustaining our life. And in this way, we can look at maybe something simple like natural flood benefit and the beaver wetlands holding water, which could have flooded houses downstream in the past. And then you can start to think about actually the disconnection that people in the area probably feel from nature because it's not integrated in their lives, that they're suffering from flooding, they're suffering from drought. And then you have sort of the sky high insurance claims and the business costs that go hand in hand with those sort of conditions. And this is actually creating what we kind of see as green finance opportunities. So this is where we at Derbyshire Wildlife Trust can create business cases to talk to the communities and the businesses in this sense, in natural flood management downstream, so that they can pay for the ecosystem services they're relying on. And this is how we're going to fund the restoration of these natural processes and bring in these species that can help us to then maintain. So it's about, we make a business case to restore a natural process, and by doing that through species reintroduction, that will then be sustained in perpetuity. If we go to the next slide, please. And this is another video, so I'm going to look to Helen and just see if there's anything that we can do with this. Amazing, thanks, Helen.
What we can do is, if we don't share the videos right now, we can share them in an email to everybody so that you can join, because it is a really beautiful video of the bittern, so and the strategy video as well, so you won't miss it.
Here we go. Thank you, Helen. So what you're seeing here is a bittern at Willington. So they returned to breed at Willington for the first time on record in 2022. And that's likely linked to the beaver management at the site, lessening the disturbance, because previously we had to have volunteer parties come in, land on the islands and clear some of the willow to manage the habitat. Whereas actually the beavers just go from the water side, manage the willow for us, so we have less volunteers going in. And we think that might be one of the reasons that bitterns have been able to come to Willington. Obviously, it's amazing to see this sort of species recovery as a direct result of species reintroduction. And it's worth us saying as well that we did not know that we could have, well, we knew we could have bittern in the environment and they could be nearby, but we do not know the natural processes that are missing. We know to an extent, and we had an idea. We knew that beavers could manage the wetlands better than us, but this is just one small way where we didn't know the full extent of natural processes, but we're reaping the benefits anyway. Brilliant, thanks, Helen. Here we go. Yes. So we want to reintroduce more species. We want to build on things like the beaver introduction that we've already completed. And so we're developing a reintroduction framework. So this is focusing on the different types of species and the different complexities that there are within that. So you can see here we've got a lesser spotted woodpecker, and this is classed as, say, a rapidly declining or recently extinct species. You could also have maybe water vole in that category. Then we have keystone species, which create better conditions for a range of other species, and that's your beaver before, and here we have the Eurasian elk. And we have umbrella species, so they sort of need the conditions to survive, which are also required by other species. So we've got an osprey in great need of wetlands, you know, pine marten need woodlands, salmon, black grouse, Eurasian crane, redback shrike, all umbrella species. And then we're looking at citizen engagement, where we can work with communities on reintroductions and reinforcement. So that might be species like the tree frog or the minotaur dung beetle. And we've actually just completed a project at Gangmine and Rose End Meadows that's beginning to look at minotaur dung beetles. If we go to the next slide, please. So species reintroduction can carry risks. So this includes complexity and cost and landowner concerns and perception of impact. But it's about us having a choice. You know, do we become bold leaders, or do we work cautiously within national frameworks? Where do we sit within that? What is a sensible course of action while still being ambitious and recognizing the urgency of nature's recovery? So where we sit within that is that we have been working to build foundations for species reductions in Derbyshire for a long time. So you might know that we've published the local nature recovery strategy this year, or the council have, sorry. So DWT have been heavily involved in influencing the local nature recovery strategy. That's agreed by partners and will be delivered. We did a lot of the mapping and also the specific species advice, and fought for some species to be included within that. It was published in the autumn, and that's about bringing together a multi-agency working group on species reintroduction at a county level. We have, and we lead the Derbyshire Multi-Agency Species Reintroduction Working Group, a bit of a mouthful, with Natural England. So again, that's looking at how we can apply the local nature recovery strategy. And then we've also done some quite pioneering work around wild beavers. So I mentioned the reintroduction before. That's within the enclosure at Willington Wetlands Nature Reserve. We currently have no wild beavers in Derbyshire. So the beaver feasibility assessment is bringing together 23 key stakeholders in the area to co-design a strategy for feasibility and look at Derbyshire's readiness for wild beavers. And that's before we move ahead to any reintroduction. We will ensure Derbyshire's readiness for each species. We go to the next slide, please. Yes, so what we have done so far with our beaver feasibility assessment initiative is we brought together stakeholders, including the Trent Rivers Trust, the Environment Agency, Natural England, the National Farmers Union, Countryside CLA, someone will get me on the acronym, but it's a landowners organisation, recreational organisations such as Paddle, Peak District National Park Authority, you know, a swathe of different stakeholders that are representatives of key groups along the river. And what we've done is pull these representatives together to co-create a feasibility strategy. So we asked them, what would you need to be considered and addressed to determine Derbyshire's readiness for wild beavers? And that included things like, you know, can wild beaver reintroduction prevent paddle users from using certain areas of the river? Or if my field floods because of a beaver dam, like who's going to pay? Or, you know, really critical things like, will wild beavers be a danger to me or my property? So we we took quite a while. It was about a year of heavy consultation with these partners, and we managed to publish a strategy in the spring. We were also happy to see that national legislation changed, which does now enable wild beaver release on license from Natural England. So what that meant was that we got about 75% approval immediately from our members at that point on our feasibility strategy to move into delivery, and the remainder just wanted a few tweaks. And we also proposed a couple of potential release scenarios to our stakeholders so they could consider these for including in the feasibility project to hopefully work towards a point where we can determine Derbyshire's readiness and potentially move through to a wild beaver release in the future. So yeah, like I say, we've got over 95% approval on the potential release scenarios, and now we're working hand in hand with these stakeholders to deliver the feasibility strategy, including the sort of economic, ecological and social modelling work that's necessary to see what impact beavers could have on our landscape. And actually in Danielle's team, we've got a really exciting outreach and education arm of this. So the key thing that we want to do is make sure that we're all aware that wild beavers could be in Derbyshire before we make the decision as to whether we'd like that to happen. So that's ongoing at the moment, and yeah, exciting developments in plans for next year too. If we go forward, please. Yeah, so this is about us reaching for the benefits that species bring. We think it's justified, think it's important, and we think we're capable to deliver this sort of positive change for Derbyshire. Species reintroductions isn't all just complexity and cost and risk of persecution. Actually, it's really inspiring. It brings public support to our work in a way that we haven't seen before. It tells a story of hope and potential recovery. It can tackle these themes of eco-anxiety that are becoming more prevalent, and it can encourage nature connection, which is linked to well-being and people's quality of life. We will also be delivering that sort of ecological transformation at a landscape scale, so huge societal benefits, and that's where I'm talking about the broken systems earlier. And I've done a terrible job on my formatting for this last one, so apologies, but it does open the door to partnerships, collaboration, community-led action, and well-being there. So really want to do this as a community, not just with the community as a separate entity. If we go forward, Helen. And this is just looking at maybe some of the species that brought you here this evening. So to give a little information on each of those, the white stork is missing from Derbyshire. We've got records to show that, archaeological records to show that stork nested in the area, but the last stork was lost from the UK, from the top of Edinburgh Cathedral 600 years ago. Stork are really key sort of wetland ambassadors. They're an iconic species, being so large, so they inspire folklore. You know Aesop's fables, you know that stork bring the babies. Across Europe, they host huge festivals like Baba Marta, they call it. When the stork return from migration, they bring with them spring. So they're really, they've got a real clear connection with people. And this is partly because they live for 30 or 40 years and they always come back to the same nest. So you know the stork in your community, and you can form that sort of love for nature. And again, stork love people too, so it really brings that nature to your doorstep, because stork are one of the reasons they yeah, they're so loved by people is that they like to nest really close to people's houses. And imagine if we could have them on community buildings in Derbyshire and all sorts. So we are working to see if we could reintroduce a breeding pair of storks, white stork, to Derbyshire. They fly over, but they always return to the same nest, and they were reintroduced in the south of England a few years ago. So they're just not staying yet. So we're doing what we can to bring breeding white stork back to Derbyshire. With pine marten, again, it's really exciting opportunity to have Derbyshire's largest landowners approached us about pine marten. So it really shows that there's an appetite out there and people recognise the benefit. Pine marten are often associated with squirrel, in that they evolved obviously with our native red squirrel, who are much quicker to evade them than the grey squirrel. So actually, it's been shown that pine martens can control grey squirrel numbers, and that leaves the opportunity that maybe in future that could happen to a point at which we could consider a red squirrel release as a red squirrel recovery project as viable. At this point, we just don't. But yeah, so again, they can have this massive impact, and also, of course, controlling the grey squirrel numbers would bring health benefits to trees, and reintroducing the pine marten would really force landowners in Derbyshire to work together to provide that sort of connected wooded habitat that we're much missing. And that is part of our sort of wider work in our landscape recovery programs for a Derwent living forest, for example, and creating a more wooded and wet corridor up Derbyshire as our response to climate and the biodiversity crises. And then we've got the Eurasian elk, and this is again somewhere where we're really trying to pioneer something positive for nature. Out of the whole of the UK, it was only Willington Wetlands and the Idle Valley in Nottinghamshire that were chosen for a feasibility study to check whether we could reintroduce elk on site. And this would be in an enclosure. We're a long way off, as I said earlier, with elk, but having species in an enclosure, as with the beaver, it allows us to demonstrate what the species are like. It allows people to understand them, be less scared of them, be inspired with them. We can spread all of the stories and evidence there is from across in continental Europe, where of course people live alongside the elk and it's not a problem because they've never been missing. And we can work, you know, alongside with our neighbours in NOS towards in the future having elk in the landscape and managing our woodland and wetlands ecosystems for us. And it's worth saying as well that they're the only large herbivore that browse underwater, so it's a key natural process that's missing there. Oh, sorry, drinking water now. I've obviously been speaking a lot. And that brings me, I think, to my last few slides. So Helen, if you could just, yeah, come into this. And it's sort of the urgency behind the webinar this evening. So we are the most nature depleted country in the world, one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. And the Peak District in Derbyshire, I think, is the most nature depleted national park in the UK. So, you know, we're in a really severe spot where we are. The abundance of species has declined to 17% of its levels in 1970. And 1 in 10 species is facing risk of extinction. And Danielle, if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to hand back to you.
Is that the end of the presentation? Nicely done if it is. Yeah, that was brilliant. Thanks. Do you know, I've heard it a couple of times, but I always just learn something new every time, and it's just so hopeful. I hope you've all really enjoyed it. So yeah, so now for questions. So if you have any questions, if you want to pop them in the chat, and then I will share them with Ruth. Unless you can actually read them, Ruth, but I'll read it out. So so this is from Penny Anderson, and she asks, what evidence do you have for elk being native in England? They were once an island, but that was post-glacial and climate has changed since then. What about predators to control numbers when they get out of hand like deer? What about wild cats? So there's quite a few questions in there, so you might want to break that down.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to answer abruptly, but coughing fit. Yeah, so really with elk and with all species, we're being evidence-based. So it's looking at archaeological records, looking at what used to be here. So there's materials that you can find, for example, from caves in the Peak District, where we found stork bones and all sorts of things, and with elk as well. So it's likely that elk were common across the Trent Valley particularly because they look for woodlands and wetlands. And yes, it's been 3,000 years and we've had some significant change. But what has changed in that time is that we lost that key natural process. And these are large herbivores that can have a significant impact on the landscape. And it's that idea of shifting baseline syndrome. Sorry. So at first, ecological breakdown wasn't so severe, wasn't so apparent because it was just one or two items going missing from the ecosystem. And then over time, that has spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. And now we're at a point where it's not, oh, we lost elk 3,000 years ago. It's, well, we've lost, 83% of our species abundance since 1970, which is 55 years ago. So it's really at a point of critical urgency that we look to these ecosystem engineers, these keystone species that I was speaking about, such as elk, because their reintroduction could have such a positive impact on the landscape. So I hope that answers that part. And in terms of potential control of elk populations in future, obviously we're only reintroducing elk into enclosure, so we have absolute full control. At a point where they go out into the wild landscape, we'd absolutely, I mean, if a deer escapes from Woollerton Hall, it can get shot instantly if it causes an issue. So there's very little concern that we'd be able to control these animals, and we'd be a while off getting to a population stage where we need to look at a predator that could finish off an elk for us. Although you're right, wildcats are also predators, maybe not for an elk, but for smaller deer species. And in Scotland we can see where wildcat populations are recovering, but it's not something that we're considering in Derbyshire just yet because of our social landscape, and everything needs to be sort of in time and when Derbyshire's ready. I think that's the really critical bit. And while you might be ready for wildcats to return, we have to wait until we can deliver that in a sort of a fair, just way where everybody involved would be happy about it. I think that answers all parts of the question.
Thanks, Ruth. That was great. Emily is asking, are these species that would be released in more rural, quieter areas, or could we see them close to our towns and cities? I would love to see them close to,
so
beavers swimming in Derby. It'd be great.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Species like beavers would swim through the middle of Derby. I was recently in Lithuania, and in the middle of their second city, Kaunas, we saw massive beaver wetlands in their river. And actually the white stork as well, they love people, like I say, so you could well see a white stork in towns and cities. Things like pine marten are incredibly elusive, so you'd be lucky to see one if you're in the countryside, to be honest. But that's because they move over massive territories, so it really depends on the animal and the behavior. But we would share all the information about the sort of animal and its behavior and what it's going to do to where before we do any species reintroductions. And I've just seen another question come in, Danielle.
Should I? Honey again. Can you see that? Yeah. Are you complying with the IUCN criteria for species reintroduction? I don't think they would cover elk.
Yeah, so we do follow the IUCN guidance for species introductions. And what that means for elk is that we are doing a feasibility study. So we've commissioned an organisation to look at whether Willington Wetlands is suitable habitat for elk from like biosecurity point of view, from a habitat, will there be enough feed? Can we host a big enough? Do we have a sufficient area? How will it impact on other species there, and so on? So yeah, we absolutely follow IUCN guidelines.
It's great. Well, that's it for now, I think, for the questions. But I'm sure if you've got any more questions that you think about after the webinar, I'm sure the team would be happy to answer them.
Danielle, can I just jump back in? Because one thing I didn't say as I sort of spluttered off towards the end of my presentation is just that the reason that we've put this on tonight is because we have this appeal to bring back lost species. and that this week is a particularly important week in terms of that. So we are working with the Big Give. It's an opportunity we've not had before, and it only runs from the 2nd to the 9th of December. What that means is that any donation made in this week, so including today, will be doubled, which could have an amazing impact on our ability to deliver some of the work we've spoken about today. So I'm sure you'll explain further, but if you go to the last slide, Helen, there is a QR code. And if people feel compelled to make a donation this evening, they can do through via that link, or you can find links on our social media. Danielle, is that?
It's pretty much everywhere around our social. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Insta, there's lots of links there. There's a really great video where you'll get to see Ruth again. It's a really lovely video. But yeah, if you can support it, that'd be great. And even if you can just share it with your friends, maybe by word of mouth or on social, that would be great. We only have a week. And it's just, yeah, like Ruth said, it's a fantastic opportunity for us. It's only a very short window. So yeah, please share if you can. And I do think that draws us to an end. So thanks ever so much. Thanks, Helen, who stepped in last minute to help us out with some technology issues. So thanks ever so much, Helen. And yeah, well, there is somebody who's got their hand up. So shall I hang on just really quickly? I'm thinking it might be Emily who's typing.
I know, I think it's just, it was just a reaction.
Oh,
thank you so much, Ian. Yeah, brilliant.
All right. Well, thanks ever so much for joining us, everybody.
Sorry, Emily is. Oh, she's just put a nice comment on for you.
Yeah,
thank you,
Emily. It has been really interesting. Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Helen, and thanks everybody for joining us. See you again soon.
Bye.